In May 1999, a 14-year-old girl walked into a Hong Kong police station, trembling. She wasn't there to report a crime, but to confess to one. She told officers she was being terrorized, haunted in her nightmares by a ghost. But this was no ordinary ghost story. The girl, Lau Ming-fong, was a participant in a real-life nightmare. A torment so profound her fractured psyche could no longer contain the horror. What she revealed next would lead police to one of the most depraved crime scenes in modern Asian history. They would find a doll, a global icon of innocence, Hello Kitty. And inside it, sewn with brutal precision, would be the boiled skull of a young woman. This is the case that would become forever known as the Hello Kitty murder. What you are about to hear is shocking, it is real, and it will test your understanding of human depravity. If you appreciate deep investigations of dark cases, please like this video, subscribe to Lost Traces, and comment below what you already know about this case. The girl's confession, driven by what she described as hauntings, was in truth the collapse of extreme post-traumatic stress. She wasn't an informant, she was an accomplice. On May 24, 1999, she led authorities to the source of her nightmares, an apartment on the third floor of number 31, Block B, Granville Road, in Tsim Sha Tsui. This was a bustling area of Hong Kong, a hub of commerce and tourism, a place where the local economy pulsed with life day and night. People hurried to shops, seeking the latest trends, making and spending money, oblivious that just feet above them, an unspeakable horror had unfolded for over a month. The apartment itself was a predator's nest, rented by a triad member named Man-lok, and it was within these walls that police discovered the object that would give the case its name and seal its notoriety. They found it. A large Hello Kitty plush doll, specifically, a mermaid model. But something was terribly wrong. There were crude stitches across the doll's head that didn't belong. When investigators opened it, they recoiled in horror. Inside was the decapitated, meticulously boiled skull of a 23-year-old woman, Fan Man-yee. The smell, according to reports, was unbearable. The skull was not alone. The doll was also filled with dead insects, a final, grotesque defilement. This singular act, this juxtaposition of a beloved symbol of childhood innocence with the ritualistic desecration of human remains, created a new potent symbol of horror. It wasn't just a murder, it was a symbolic violation. It was this act that gripped the 6 million people of Hong Kong, sending a shockwave through the city, a place more accustomed to dealing with finance and wealth than with evil this visceral. The search of the apartment revealed further horrors. In a plastic bag, police found some of the victim's internal organs. A single tooth was recovered. The rest of Fan Man-yee had been systematically dismembered, cooked and discarded in trash dumps across Hong Kong, in Sham Shui Po, Wan Chai, and Tai Kok Tsui. Her killers had tried to erase her, to destroy all evidence of her existence. Inside the apartment's refrigerator, officers found a necklace belonging to Fan Man-yee, a small piece of her life that would later be given to her young son, an infant who would now never know his mother. The official identification of the skull occurred on June 3, 1999, at the Lockhart mortuary, using a photo overlapping method. The victim finally had her name back, Fan Man-yee, but the discovery only opened an abyss of questions. Who was this young woman? And who were the monsters capable of committing such an act? The case wasn't broken by standard detective work, not by clues or surveillance. It was broken by the psychological collapse of a child accomplice, so traumatized by what she had seen and done that she believed she was being haunted. The truth was, the haunting wasn't supernatural, it was the inescapable memory of human cruelty. This case, which began not with police but with a ghost, would expose a web of vulnerability, coercive control, and pure sadism. To understand what happened in that apartment on Granville Road, we must first understand the life of the woman who was lost there. A life marked by tragedy, by poverty, and by a desperate attempt to escape her past, an attempt that, ironically, led her directly into the hands of her future killers. To understand the depravity of the crime, one must first understand the systemic vulnerabilities that defined the victim's life. Fan Man-yee was a ghost long before her skull was sewn into a doll. Born in Shenzhen in 1976, her life was a case study in structural failure. She was abandoned by her family, a familiar tragedy, and was raised in an all-girls orphanage in Ma Tau Wai. This was her first home, but it was not a permanent one. The system that was meant to protect her was the first to fail her. At the age of 15, she was forced to leave the orphanage due to an age restriction. This bureaucratic decision immediately rendered her homeless, casting her onto the streets of one of the world's most densely populated cities with no money, no family, and no support system. She was a child, alone, and invisible. This event precipitated a predictable and tragic spiral. Alone and unsupported, Fan Man-yee was drawn into the underbelly of Hong Kong's thriving economy, the dark side of its wealth. She became addicted to drugs and was forced into street prostitution simply to survive. This wasn't a choice. It was a consequence of a system that had discarded her. By age 21, she was working at a brothel named Romance Villa. It was here, in this transactional world of desperation and fleeting encounters, that she first came into contact with one of her regular clients, her future murderer, the triad pimp, Man-lok. In 1996, she married Chi Yuen, another client and a fellow drug addict. The relationship was abusive. Neighbors in their Mongkok apartment would later report being awakened by the sounds of fights and the child screaming and crying. Her life was a cycle of poverty, addiction, and violence, a stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers and immense riches of the city around her. Then, in November 1998, just 5 months before her murder, a pivotal event occurred. Fan Man-yee gave birth to a son. This tiny new life became her anchor. Reports state that Fan decided to turn her life around in order to protect her son and provide him a safer life. This was her moment of clarity, a desperate bid to break the cycle. She made a concerted, painful effort to reform. She quit drugs, she stopped prostituting, and she eventually left her violent husband. She found a new, safer job as a hostess at the Empress Karaoke Club. This was a step toward legitimacy, a way to earn an income in the regular economy, a way to be a mother. But this attempt at reform is the central, gut-wrenching tragedy of her life. While she escaped her previous circumstances, her new life left her with a much lower income. She struggled to support herself and her son. The financial desperation was crushing. She was trying to build a stable life, but the gains from her new job were not enough to cover the basic costs of living, of raising a child, of existing. This financial pressure is the most likely context for the single act that sealed her fate: stealing Man-lok's wallet. It wasn't an act of malice, but of desperation. Fan Man-yee was not murdered as a consequence of her old life in prostitution. She was murdered as a direct, tragic, and ironic consequence of her attempts to escape that life for her son. Her pursuit of a stable economic future, a simple, safe life, is what put her on a collision course with the very man who symbolized the past she was fighting so hard to leave behind. She was killed not for her sins, but for her hope. And the men who would take her life were not just criminals, but a small, coercive group orbiting a single predatory leader. The group responsible for Fan Man-yee's death was not a professional criminal outfit, not a high-level triad operation focused on multi-million-dollar gains. It was something almost more terrifying: a small, coercive, and depraved group orbiting a single predatory leader. The ringleader was 33-year-old Man-lok, known as Ah-lok. He was a notorious pimp and a known member of the Wo-shing-wo triad. Man-lok was the one with the criminal connections and the history to prove it, holding previous convictions for drug trafficking. He was Fan Man-yee's former client, the man who represented the life she was trying to flee. It was Chan who rented the apartment on Granville Road, securing the very stage upon which the horror would unfold. He was the sun around which this dark, twisted system revolved. His power was absolute within the small confines of that flat, and his motives would soon warp from a dispute over money into something far more sinister. His accomplices were 21-year-old Leung Wai-lun and 26-year-old Leung Shing-cho. Their aliases, Gangsta 1 and Gangsta 2, sound almost juvenile, like something chosen by youths playing at being criminals. And in a way, they were. Unlike Chan, neither of the Leungs were significant triad figures. They didn't command respect in the underworld. They didn't have significant economic power or criminal gains of their own. Both of them worked low-level jobs at a retail store near Granville Road. This detail is crucial. It suggests disaffected, ordinary young men, perhaps bored with their mundane lives and meager incomes, who were drawn into the orbit of a charismatic, notorious criminal. Man-lok likely offered them a sense of power, of belonging, of being part of something dangerous and real. They were followers, performing a version of toughness that, when trapped inside that apartment echo chamber, would spiral into unrestrained sadistic violence. They were the muscle eager to please their leader, and in doing so, they unleashed their own latent cruelty. The final member of this quartet was the key that would unlock the entire case, 14-year-old Lau Ming-fong, or Ah Fong. On the surface, she was the girlfriend of the older accomplice, Leung Shing-cho. But a more critical analysis describes her true role. She was Man-lok's grooming victim. This 14-year-old girl was not a hardened criminal. She was a child, entangled in a toxic relationship with an older man and manipulated by an even older predatory pimp. Her presence confirms the group's true dynamic. This was not a criminal conspiracy of equals plotting to maximize their financial gains. This was a high-control, coercive family, a cult of personality cultivated by Man-lok. He was the patriarch, the predator, and the two Leungs and Ah Fong were his followers, his tools, and in Ah Fong's case, his victim. This toxic dynamic created an echo chamber, a closed system where Chan's depravity was not only mirrored, but amplified by his followers, each one eager to prove their loyalty. The apartment on Granville Road became a sealed world, governed only by Chan's whims, and those whims were about to evolve from a rational dispute over a small debt into a month of irrational, indulgent, and hellish sadism. The entire crime demonstrates this terrifying and clear evolution. It did not begin as a plan to murder. It began with a rational financial dispute, the kind of business Man-lok, as a pimp and triad member, was used to handling. The pretext was a simple debt. In early 1999, Fan Man-yee, struggling with her much lower income after quitting prostitution, stole a wallet from her former client. That client was Man-lok. The wallet contained approximately 4,000 Hong Kong dollars. When Chan discovered the theft, his response was swift and predatory. He didn't just want his money back, he saw an opportunity to profit, to exert control. He demanded the return of the initial $4,000 plus an additional $10,000 fee. This was an exorbitant sum for Fan, an amount she simply couldn't gather. She returned the original $4,000 immediately, but pleaded for more time to gather the fee. This act of stealing, born from her financial desperation, gave Man-lok the only excuse he needed. He wasn't just angry about the money, he was angry that a woman he saw as his property, a former prostitute, had dared to cross him. The debt was the pretext, but the motive was control. And on March 17, 1999, he and his new family decided it was time to collect. On March 17, 1999, the four of them, Man-lok, the two Leungs, and the 14-year-old Lau Ming-fong, acted. They traveled to Fan Man-yee's flat at Fuyu House, Lai Yu Estate, in Kwai Chung. This was her new home, the safe place she had tried to build for her son, far from the life she had left behind. They abducted her. There was no negotiation, no final warning. They simply took her, dragging her back into the world she had fought to escape, and imprisoned her in Chan's rented apartment at 31 Granville Road. At this point, Man-lok still had a rational criminal plan, one rooted in the cold economics of his trade. His initial idea was not murder, but profit. He intended to make money off of Fan by pimping her out to other men. In his mind, she was a depreciated asset that owed him, and this was how he would extract his financial gains, covering both the stolen $4,000 and his extortionate $10,000 fee. He would turn her body back into a source of income, a commodity. But this profit-driven motive evaporated almost immediately. The apartment on Granville Road was a closed, depraved ecosystem, a pressure cooker for sadism. Within those walls, the normal rules of society, of the bustling economy just outside, disappeared. The only law was the whim of Man-lok, amplified by his eager followers. The cruelty, fed by Fan's total powerlessness, became the true motive. The official motive for what happened next was later listed as inconclusive, possibly sadism. The details of the month-long ordeal support this conclusion unequivocally. This was no longer about a debt. It was about power. It was about the complete and utter annihilation of a human being. The daily, systematic torture began. She was beaten with metal bars. She was beaten with metal pipes. She was strung up and used as a punching bag, a living object for their rage and amusement. On at least one occasion, one of the men kicked her in the head about 50 times in a single, sustained fit of brutality. The torture quickly escalated beyond simple violence, incorporating sadistic rituals designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Her legs and feet were burned. They used hot wax. They melted plastic and dripped the scalding liquid onto her skin, searing her flesh. This specific torment eventually rendered her unable to walk, taking away her last remote chance of escape. She was trapped, immobile, entirely at their mercy. The perpetrators would then rub spices like chili into her open, weeping wounds. This was an act of calculated agony, designed to make her suffering exquisite. The psychological torment was as severe as the physical. Fan was forced to smile. She was forced to say that she enjoyed the beatings. If she refused, if her body's involuntary agony betrayed her, she was subjected to even harsher torture. Burning a victim with melted plastic does not extract a $10,000 debt. Forcing a woman to smile while you destroy her is not a strategy for financial gain. This was an indulgence in depravity. This was pure sadism. In addition to the relentless torture, she was repeatedly, brutally raped. For approximately 1 month, this was her existence. Trapped in a room, unable to walk, subjected to the unimaginable whims of her 4 captors. This was a group existing entirely outside the normal world of jobs, income, and consequences. They had created their own pocket universe of horror. We need to pause for a moment. These details are horrifying, but they are the factual reality of what Fan Man-yee endured. It is one of the most disturbing cases we have ever covered on Lost Traces. If you are finding this investigation valuable, please take a second to hit the like button. It tells YouTube you appreciate this kind of in-depth factual storytelling. Now, back to the timeline. After weeks of this sustained, systematic ordeal, Fan Man-yee's body gave out. She could not endure any more. Sometime between April 14th and April 15th, 1999, she died. The official cause of death was determined to be traumatic shock. She had died from the sheer, overwhelming agony and trauma inflicted upon her. Her captors, now murderers, were left in their small apartment with a body. Their primary motive, which had long since shifted from profit to pleasure, now shifted again, to pure, panicked disposal. Upon discovering Fan Man-yee's body in the apartment, the perpetrators' focus shifted instantly from sadistic indulgence to panicked self-preservation. They were no longer torturers. They were murderers with a body in a small flat on a busy street. Their primary objective became the complete and total eradication of evidence. What followed was a systematic and brutal effort to make Fan Man-yee disappear. They dismembered her body. They boiled the remains, a horrifying process intended to strip the flesh from the bones and make disposal easier. Her body was decapitated. Most of her remains were then bagged and discarded like common refuse in trash dumps across the sprawling city of Hong Kong, scattered in locations like Sham Shui Po, Wan Chai, and Tai Kok Tsui. The men believed that by scattering her, they could never be linked to the crime. But one piece was treated differently. In the act that would forever define this case, they took her boiled skull and sewed it inside the head of the Hello Kitty mermaid plush doll. When Lau Ming-fong finally led the police to the apartment on May 24th, this is what they found. This was the grotesque trophy, the icon of their depravity. When officers examined it, they also found it was filled with dead insects. This was the singular object that would sear the case into the public's memory, a horrifying blend of childhood innocence and ritualistic desecration. Because of their gruesome efficiency, all that was ever recovered of Fan Man-yee was this skull, one tooth, and some internal organs found in a plastic bag. They had, in practical terms, successfully destroyed the crime scene, the victim's body. This brutal method of disposal, however, created one of the most profound and disturbing legal paradoxes in Hong Kong's criminal history. The perpetrators' crazy and scary act of evidence destruction, the very thing that demonstrated their depravity and callousness, became their single most effective legal defense. Their attempt to erase their crime was so gruesomely successful that it created a legal loophole. To secure a murder conviction, the prosecution would have to prove a definitive, specific cause of death. They would have to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the perpetrator's actions directly led to her death at a specific moment. But with no body, no intact remains, and only a boiled skull, that was forensically impossible. The jury would hear testimony of a month of torture, but the defense could argue that something else killed her. It was this legal technicality, born from the perpetrator's own brutality, that would stand between them and a conviction for murder, leading to a trial that would shock the public all over again. The trial for the 3 male perpetrators, case number CACC 522-2000, began on October 20th, 2000, and concluded just over 6 weeks later on December 7th. The prosecution's entire case rested heavily, almost exclusively, on the testimony of the 14-year-old accomplice, Lau Ming-fong. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She was the only living witness to what happened inside that apartment. The perpetrators, Man-lok and shing-cho, did not deny dismembering her body. They could not. The skull in the doll was undeniable proof of that, but they vehemently denied killing her. This set the stage for the trial's central agonizing legal question, as one report noted: did a murder occur? The 8-man, 1-woman jury was about to be presented with 2 conflicting truths: the moral reality of a month-long torture and the legal requirement for a provable cause of death. Their decision would ignite a firestorm of public outrage and debate about the very nature of justice. The 8-man, 1-woman jury returned a 6-3 verdict. It was not guilty of murder. It was guilty of manslaughter. This verdict was a direct, paradoxical consequence of the perpetrator's own horrifying efficiency. The jury ruled for the lesser charge precisely because the victim's remains were so thoroughly destroyed that it was impossible to demonstrate whether Fan Man-yee was murdered or died from a drug overdose of methamphetamine. While her month-long torture was undeniable, the specific, provable causa mortis required for a murder conviction was forensically absent. The public was stunned. This trial highlighted a profound, sickening disconnect between legal truth and moral reality. The jury had heard weeks of testimony about metal bars, melted plastic, and forced humiliation, yet the law's technical demands had been, in a way, outsmarted by the sheer depravity of the act itself. The sentencing judge, Justice Peter Nguyen, did not hide his disgust. In his sentencing, he stated, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness." Psychiatric reports from Castle Peak Hospital had described all 3 men as remorseless. Despite the manslaughter conviction, the judge handed down the maximum sentence possible. All 3 men, Man-lok, Leung Wai-lun, and Leung Shing-cho, were sentenced to life in prison, with a possibility of parole after 20 years. For a moment, it seemed justice had found a way. Man-lok and Leung Wai-lun are currently serving their life sentences in Stanley Prison. Chan's appeal was denied. But the story of Leung Shing-cho, Gangsta 2, took another dark turn. On appeal in March 2004, his sentence was commuted from life to 18 years. The Hello Kitty murder horrified Hong Kong. As the gruesome details of the torture, the dismemberment, and the doll were revealed, the city's 6 million residents were gripped with fear. The case was immediately labeled one of the most depraved cases Hong Kong has ever seen. The intense publicity and fascination led to the rapid production of 2 exploitation-style films in 2001, Human Pork Chop and There is a Secret in My Soup. The crime also became physically imprinted on the city's landscape. The apartment at 31 Granville Road became one of Hong Kong's most infamous, haunted locations, a physical monument to the trauma. Reports circulated that CCTVs in the area captured a female form lurking in the shops long after closing hours. The building became so toxic that it was finally demolished in 2012. In 2016, a new hotel, the Soravit, was built on the site, an act of urban cleansing to pave over the city's dark memory. But this case has one final terrifying postscript. Leung Shing-cho, the man whose sentence was commuted to 18 years, was released from prison in April 2014. For 8 years, he was a free man. Then, in August 2022, he was arrested and jailed once again, this time for sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl. This reoffense is a horrific validation of the original remorseless psychiatric assessment. It confirms that the motive listed as possibly sadism was not a situational aberration, but an intrinsic, incurable trait. It retroactively indicts the appeals court's decision to show him leniency. The evil displayed in that apartment in 1999 was not cured by 18 years of imprisonment. It was simply waiting. The case of Fan Man-yee is a story of systemic failure. A failure of the orphanage that released her. A failure of a society that left her vulnerable. And a legal failure that allowed the very nature of her horrific murder to serve as a defense for her killers. The Hello Kitty doll, once a symbol of innocence, was forever perverted into a monument of human cruelty. The apartment is gone, but the scar on the city's psyche remains, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk just above a busy, prosperous street. Thank you for joining Lost Traces for this investigation. If you believe these stories must be told, please subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a case. We'll see you in the next one.